Welcome to the Cities podcast powered by the Business Journal's Leadership Trust. Each episode on Cities looks at a particular topic, challenge, trend, or political situation through the lens of local markets. Our contributors are members of a Business Journal's Leadership Trust.
Hey everyone, this is Stephen Ganoza. This is our first episode in a series on the Inequality Dilemma. What's causing income and wealth disparity, particularly in major cities, and what can be done to bridge the gaps? Today, we have my interview with Kelley Griesmer. Kelley is joining us from Columbus, Ohio, where she is a member of Columbus Business First Leadership Trust and the president and CEO of the Women's Fund of Central Ohio. Kelley, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show.
Of course, it's my pleasure. Thanks for the opportunity.
So before we get into Columbus specifically, let's talk about your work with the Women's Fund of Central Ohio. According to its website, the Women's Fund provides a platform for those who recognize that the world isn't changing for women and girls. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Sure. We were created about 20 years ago, a little less than 20 years ago, to raise capital for social change. We saw that women and girls had been behind in reaching their full potential pretty much since the beginning of time, and we weren't seeing investments in helping them reach that potential. When we knew the business case showed that when women reach their full potential, we all do better. So we've been on this journey for the last 18 and a half years or so to try to not only raise that capital that can be invested into initiatives that help women reach their full potential, but we also do research to tell us where that impact can most quickly be made effectively. And that has led us on a journey from everything to understanding what girls need as they grow up, to now most recently to then what gender norms exist and why for both women and men, and how those gender norms reinforce themselves over and over again. To now how those gender norms have led to not only inequality in pay equity, which we talk about a lot, but wealth equity, that there's such a gap for women of all types, but most certainly for women of color when it comes to how they accumulate wealth, if any. And that the business case for our world is to find a way for them to accumulate wealth, because again, it will help all of us. And so we have been committed to that type of social change and do research, make grants, and engage the community in various ways to achieve those goals.
Just unpacking that, you're raising money. Who are you raising money from? What are some of the programs that you're putting in place? How are you practically looking to achieve these goals?
Yeah, so we had, when we first opened our doors, 15 women got together, and the idea was, number one, to get more women engaged in philanthropy, because women raising money for women, what we thought that was the best place to start. They would most likely understand the challenges that need to be tackled. And so we started down a road of true grassroots fundraising. We've had we raise money, frankly, from anyone of any type. So of course, men are a part of that equation, but we did start with just trying to get women in the game as philanthropists, and have had success in that realm. And because a lot of women weren't giving, and we've had everything from $1 gift to $1 million gift over the years. And we try to help all of those donors understand that they are in this together, that it's not what's more important, the $1 or the $1 million, but the fact that we do it together for this shared purpose in social change. We then have had used those funds that we raise and have started from the beginning with a grant making process that involves the community. So we have currently about 250 people that gather from all corners of our community, all races, all gender identities, all backgrounds and cultures. They come together, we mix them up in the room, and they all read our grant applications, and then they make grants of usually $20,000 or less. to fund these newer and groundbreaking social initiatives. We really view ourselves as courage capital for the community to start funding things that have traditionally never been funded. And that's why things never change. We also have a few strategic grant making initiatives with a few grant recipients who receive grants 3 years in a row, and they receive slightly more. They receive about $30,000 a year. And those are usually in the realm of advocacy, specifically for key initiatives that we think, like childcare policy or paid family leave policy, access to contraception and medically accurate healthcare. Those types of things that we really do believe are just critical issues to women, to the advancement of women's economic empowerment. So we, try to have at all points sort of grassroots involvement in both how we raise the money and then how we grant the money out. And the research certainly informs that grant making process, as well as some of the money that we raise is also used for those research reports.
And just to be clear, when the grants are given, right, the $30,000 in capital, how is that actually being deployed? Is it creating new programs or subsidizing existing programs to make them more accessible?
Well, for instance, it's a good question. For instance, one of the $30,000 strategic grant recipients is the Peer Education Program at Planned Parenthood. It is a groundbreaking program where youth are actually taught in the schools to provide sex education to each other. It's much more effective when they interact. They become leaders through the process. They also are able to better engage with each other on topics that are so important to all of them reaching their full potential as adults. So in that case, it's an investment in that program. In another case, we are actually focusing on child care policy initiatives and how we engage our state and local legislatures in how they're approaching childcare, what childcare is available to people, and how we make that childcare system more affordable and effective for the people who need it most.
That covers what you do. Stepping back a bit to the larger issue, right? Discussions around gender equality, overall income equality, wealth disparity. They're often talked about in silos, right? And sometimes not as related issues, right? We see this in election season, right? One politician will be talking about how women make less than men for doing the same job. Another politician might focus on how wealth is too concentrated in the top 0.1%. It's presented as not an interrelated issue, but you see it as more interrelated.
Yeah, absolutely. There are many intersections. Number one, what we try to help people understand is not all women are the same. There is a wealth gap for all women. Our research shows that, and that on average, it would be about 40 cents on the dollar if you considered women as a gender. If you look at it more closely, Black women own about 2 cents on the dollar in our local area of Central Ohio, compared to the average. A single Black woman owns about 2 cents to the dollar of a single man. That's pretty shocking, and it's a really good example of the other intersection that you mentioned. So there's the intersection of race and gender that's really affecting those women of color. For Latinas, it's only about 8 cents on the dollar compared to that average of 40 cents. But what we also know is that solving that wealth gap is a number of issues. Many of them are, many women are running single family homes. Thus, as we just discussed, childcare is often they have to pay up to a third of whatever salary that they're making just to pay to take care of the children that they're taking care of in that single family home. They are often working jobs that are lower wages, or women have a much higher concentration of women in minimum wage jobs. So that begs the question, number one, of why many of the jobs that women do are only minimum wage. And secondly, why is our minimum wage so low? Especially when they have to pay for expensive childcare, and that is often not as readily available as needed, especially quality childcare. On top of that, they don't have the health care that they need to be able to take care of themselves and their families so that they don't have health emergencies or unexpected pregnancies. Then they don't have leave, paid family leave, because a lot of times in those minimum wage jobs, they also don't have access to sick time, family leave to take care of young children or elderly parents, yet they still bear the burden most often of caring for both of those classifications of people and their families. So it is a very interrelated issue where if it's just like, although we all talk much more often now about pay equity, and we are so excited to see the focus that legislators are having on that issue in some places. If we solved the pay equity issue tomorrow, it wouldn't come close to solving the wealth issue, because of all these other complicating factors that women just have, proportionately, they no matter which way they go, they have to make sacrifices that the average single male or any male in many cases has to make.
Addressing the income side of the problem seems easier than addressing the wealth side of the problem.
Exactly. Exactly. I mean, that's why, on the one hand, we're excited to hear people talking about pay equity because it is a component that should be easier to solve. But you're exactly right that we have an issue here in our area where 30% of the homes that are being lost to foreclosure are homes that are already owned. And that's because they're owned by women who are not left with enough wealth after their husband passes to continue paying the taxes. That speaks to something that most people never think of, that the women very often outlive men, but because they are not raised or biases and norms in our communities keep us from teaching women about investments. They don't own things. Many things are in their husband's names or their partner's names or their father's or other family members' names, and they get to a point in their life, despite being educated, perhaps maybe of having had a very long and successful marriage, and they still find themselves in a wealth gap that they can't overcome at that point in their lives any longer. And so it's something that's critical to all of us as females to better understand what wealth is. And it's not just being able to, be rich, as people would say that. It's about having the freedom to have savings, to be able to respond to emergencies, to be able to buy new tires for your car if that's the emergency that you didn't expect, to be able to pay for a healthcare situation you didn't expect. That's what wealth is. It's not about trying to create women who are billionaires, although we would certainly welcome that as well.
Of course. So how do you start to affect change here and the tide? I mean, it sounds like a big component is education. What else?
Well, we approach it from all angles. Number one, as I said, for years, we've been making grants to organizations that for the type of programs, sometimes it's hard to get people to invest in social change. But the way we look at it is if we have many, many partners in our community who are providing great direct service. So what we try to provide is the capital for those direct service providers to move the needle on, if someone's living in a shelter, how do we give them the empowerment and the economic empowerment they need to no longer need that shelter. So one of the things is to invest in programs that get to the grassroots and work with people. And then, another piece of it is investing in the advocacy and sitting down. We sit down with legislators and, we don't lobby. People get very nervous about, are we lobbying because we're a nonprofit? But the truth is you can absolutely do research the way that we do and sit down with legislators to help them understand the interconnectedness of all these issues and the bills that are before them, and that there are things that, despite that they can on a bipartisan basis support. So we invest in that type of work as well. And then to your point, we invest in helping people understand gender norms generally, to understand where they in their workplaces may be making decisions because they're thinking about the bottom line, but they're not thinking about the fact that they are disproportionately affecting certain people within their companies because they're not considering implicit biases and gender norms. So it's all of those fronts. It's making grant investments in others. It's investing in advocacy efforts with those who make our laws and those who can affect our laws, and also just investing in the community's understanding of themselves and the part that they play in the business case for all of us working together, as opposed to not.
Great. I do want to get into Columbus specifically. It's got a reputation of being an up-and-coming city, right, as a thriving place for young professionals. And there seems to be a trend that when cities attract young professionals, this in turn often results in more income inequality, right?
Mm-hmm.
Cities like San Francisco and Seattle come to mind. Amazon was essentially kicked out of Queens, New York for fear of this.
Mm-hmm.
What are you seeing in terms of inequality in Columbus specifically?
Well, we definitely have those problems. We are not immune from having communities that are becoming increasingly split when it comes to the way that schools are supported, when it comes to where housing is available. We have those problems. Every city has them, and part of it is because of the way that just urban living has grown across the country. Columbus, and you're exactly right, Columbus has the same issue, and it will only be exacerbated as income. The more that there's high income opportunities, the more likely it is that perhaps we're making some sacrifices in the way our city structures work, or land that's being used for different purposes, as certain land is picked up and used for certain commercial purposes. That may mean we're displacing individuals and the homes that they've lived in. And so we're certainly grappling with all those same issues that Seattle would have dealt with Amazon or anything else. But the one thing that I would say is that we've been able to learn as perhaps see it more quickly, because we are not in a position in Central Ohio where we lost a manufacturing industry the way many cities are grappling with that type of issue. This was always a more service-oriented industry here in Central Ohio, with the large universities, and that sort of thing in our city. So I do think we've been able to learn from other cities, and we aren't aren't trying to replace jobs that once existed and no longer do, to the extent that some other cities do. But to that extent, but we are still very prone to becoming racially segregated just by the way that our communities are growing. So again, by implicitly that's happening, and we need to be. We are very aware of it and have city initiatives that we're working on, but certainly understanding bias and the work that we do, we believe is critical for people, because a lot of times they aren't trying to create the situations that are happening. It's just happening because they aren't testing the systems that they've always known.
Right. And one thing you mentioned earlier was property taxes was something that often resulted in women losing houses, right?
Right.
And money coming into a city that's going to make property more expensive, that's going to raise assessments and property tax.
Exactly. That's exactly what's happening, is that they bought these homes at a time that the neighborhoods have not only stayed solid, but they've become even more popular around the university areas and that sort of thing. And then you're exactly right. With the influx of people, we have a great housing market here, but houses are selling for more and more, and the property taxes are going right up with it.
So what would you like to see local governments and maybe the businesses themselves do more of, knowing that this is a risk that this is a situation that other cities have, come up against. What would you like to see happen?
Well, I think there's a sort of a coalition of us here in Columbus that that do work very hard on. We have very engaged companies and corporations here in a way that I think is somewhat unique to our city, and we do try to work on things together, but it requires the people that to your point, when a company comes to Columbus, or maybe moves here or to the central Ohio area, we have to have an expectation that they're not just thinking about themselves, but they're thinking about the community that they're moving to, and become part of the partnership of all of us who of the city, the philanthropic community, and the corporate community. We really do try to work together to come up with solutions, despite the fact that we all have somewhat different interests when it comes to the bottom line. And so we have, for instance, something here called the Columbus Commitment that our mayor's office, there's a women's commission for the city of Columbus, and they have a commitment that cities will work toward pay equity. And that was initiated a few years ago in collaboration with organizations like ours, to try to get our corporate partners to realize that it's not just about buying a sponsorship or a table. It's about committing to the work of understanding pay equity. And they've had great success in getting people to sign on to that commitment. We have a program that we do called Gender by Us, that we go out to companies and we ask them to, both women and men, to sit down and have these vulnerable conversations with each other where they think about gender bias and how and test those things that they may not realize that they've baked into their hiring or their pay equity or that sort of thing. So we have these social initiatives that we view as just as important to the success of our region as how the bottom line of our companies, and we feel like these things that we do will actually make them better, and that they will make our goals come to fruition more quickly when they sign on. So we try to really push that symbiotic relationship. And right now we're having pretty good luck with it, but it's certainly something that as we grow, we have to remain attentive to.
Great. And how and companies are receptive of programs like Gender by Us?
Absolutely, yeah. We've had great luck, not only with them helping us to underwrite developing the program, but also going in and vulnerably letting us work with their employees to have these discussions that some would consider taboo. But realizing that without that kind of vulnerability, we're not going to be able to do it. So not that we've done it at every company by far, but we rarely have had anyone tell us that they think it's a bad idea. And in fact, just the reverse. It's sometimes, how deeply can we get into the topic for them? Because, large companies are trying to understand a lot of different employees. And so we focus most specifically on gender, but certainly race is a big piece of the work as well.
So what, in your view, through these programs, through the Women's Fund, how long does it take to solve these issues, right? Because you can go into companies today, address the income part of the equation. The wealth part is going to lag.
Yeah.
What's the timeline here for kind of solving this?
Yeah, that's such a great question. I think the bottom line for us is that until you change hearts and minds, you're not going to change laws till you change hearts and minds, and that's the hardest piece. And I've seen. I think that's not as long of a haul as you think, but it is requires a vulnerability that isn't readily available sometimes. And so, we certainly know that, as we said, if you were to actually make childcare, if we were even to increase just childcare limits so that someone could still access childcare benefits at 200% of the poverty line instead of 100%, it would make a marked difference. If you had paid family leave policies that didn't cause people to lose their jobs, it would actually make a marked difference. So, there's a little bit of a chicken and egg problem with the deciding the timeline, because we have to move the hearts and minds so that people will make these laws available. If they make the laws available, it can be very quick, and actually is a great business case. So, it's really critical. That's why we think it's really critical to get the community education piece out there, because the more that people start to grapple with these issues on their own, the more that they will be likely to vote for or advocate for or employ certain practices in their own communities and companies. So I don't think it's a short line. I mean, bias and discrimination have unfortunately existed since the beginning of time. But we do know that, in the type of world we live in, that so, with the technology that connects us all, we also know if we break through hearts and minds, things change pretty quickly. So there's no easy answer to the question, but it's also not a reason to be, to lose hope, because it's all very achievable if we stay in the trench together.
To that point, let's end on a happier note here. So, Columbus, Central Ohio, what excites you most about what you're seeing in terms of living in Columbus or doing business there?
I think what excites me is that I see people with a real desire, almost a hunger or thirst to connect. It's almost a rebound from technology that I never in a room where people have gathered and been, whether it's our grant making room or some of our big community discussions that are sponsored here by our local community foundation. When we do those kinds of activities, the energy that we get back from people when they say, I didn't know this, or I had never thought about that. You see energy and enthusiasm and passion around those types of experiences. And so for those of us in the nonprofit realm, I think we have a real opportunity to capitalize on the fact that people maybe haven't been connecting in authentic ways the way we used to before technology existed, but that interest is maybe more there than ever now that we've missed it a bit. So I'm excited about that to try to help people, because I think when they make those connections, it makes all my research come to life. When they talk to someone who's actually been through some of the things that we've researched, it's much easier for them to understand what's needed when they talk to someone about it than just when they read it on paper. So while the research is incredibly important, connecting the people who can actually teach each other is always going to be the best resource. And I think we have a chance to get that done here.
That's a much more positive note to end on. Kelley, before we disconnect, how can people find out more about the Women's Fund of Central Ohio, possibly donate, just get better educated around these topics?
Absolutely. We have a Women's Fund CentralOhio.org. It's long, but it is what it is. We talk about all of our different initiatives there. And then certainly anyone who's here more locally, we do programs in the community all the time, and often very open and affordable to the public. So we would welcome them to join us anytime.
Great. Kelley, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. Take care.
Next in our series on the Inequality Dilemma.
We need to stop saying no to housing, right? We need to be thoughtful about housing development and where we develop housing in our city. If projects come up or opportunities come up for bonds or other things that will help fund affordable housing development, we need to say yes.
Sherilyn Adams from San Francisco will talk about the invisible crisis of youth homelessness.
This has been the Cities Podcast, powered by the Business Journal's Leadership Trust. Please be sure to subscribe to us on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you're a member of Business Journal's Leadership Trust and would like to participate in our podcast series, please email your member concierge. If you're interested in joining a Business Journal's Leadership Trust, learn more at trust.bizjournals.com.